So welcome back. This is another conversation we're having about my year-long foundations project. If you're interested, we have another 5 conversations from the previous 5 months. So every month we're focusing on a different sort of essential aspect of living well. And this month is focused on outreach, which is basically the term I'm calling the process of sort of making new friends and maintaining your extended network, because we're going to have a separate foundation connection, which is focused on the people that you interact with regularly. So you can think of this as sort of like the friendship foundation, and the other one is more for your like really close relationships. So yeah, we're back and we're going to have a little conversation about, how this month went, some of the interesting stuff that I read, and maybe some of the takeaways if you are also interested in improving this part of your life.
So why do you think that outreach is important, especially in this stage in our lives that we are now, but also for other stages too?
I mean, I don't think you can really think of making new friends and keeping your old friends and these kind of things as totally separate affairs. The reason I split them up when I was designing this kind of 12-month project is because they seem to depend on different behaviors. Like if you're making new friends, it depends on being a little bit more extroverted, a little bit more sociable, being willing to meet new people, open to new things. Whereas maintaining your existing relationships is more about conscientiousness, agreeableness. So they kind of depend on different aspects of your personality, different behavior. But clearly they are all aimed at the same outcome, because outreach kind of logically comes first, because every single person you're close friends with, you once met, right? And I mean, even family members, you develop a relationship over time with them. And so there's a certain amount of rejuvenation you need, even if you have a lot of good close friends, because people grow old, they pass away, they move, maybe even just you grow apart in terms of what you're interested in or your life values and things like this. So I don't know anyone who, you make your friends when you're 6 and then that's your friend group for the rest of your life. If that is you, then, congratulations. But for most of us, there's going to be some amount of renewal constantly happening. And also I think, we can also talk about this as well, but there's some benefits to having a larger network, a larger base of friends that go beyond just those benefits of having intimate connections too, from career opportunities. There's a very important paper about the strength of weak ties, which just shows that a lot of our new opportunities come from people that we don't know very well, or we don't have in a really close part of our network, essentially for topological reasons, but maybe we'll get to that later.
Yeah, that's one of, maybe don't talk about this too much. It's one of my later questions.
I won't skip ahead and go too
just
far.
kind of define it and just kind of talk about how you decided on what your outreach metrics were for the month and how you went about it, like setting it up.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, just before I go into kind of the specific habits that I did, is that I think sometimes socializing, it feels more frivolous, less productive maybe than, you've got to like stay in good shape and you've got to get your work done and maybe invest your money. These are all sort of like diligent habits that, you need to be productive. Whereas we see like hanging out with friends or, going out for a drink with an old friend kind of thing. These are like fun leisure habits. They're not really like part of sustaining good life. They're just stuff you do because you physically need to, kind of thing. And I think this dichotomy between the things that are productive and the things that are sort of fun to do is a little bit misguided, because it was very interesting going through this, the research for this one, of how important having good social relationships is for our health. So even just from the same reason that you exercise to stay healthy, having good social relationships is also important for your health and this kind of thing. So I think it's important to see it as important and not just as, it's important to let off steam and have some fun from time to time. It's important to have good relationships because these are like the very essence of a good life. And to kind of cultivate that, I'm also aware that like where we are in our stage of life, like we have small kids at home, we're very busy. I'm not in the same stage I was with, this foundation as when I was in my 20s, and, you could just spend lots and lots of time hanging out with people. And that was the priority, was sort of building that extended network of friends. But it still matters. It's still something that matters. And, we've even talked about this, that like, we will have close friends and then someone moves or someone, relocates or this kind of thing. And, you need to have new people coming in. And if you don't keep replenishing it, eventually you find out, actually, like, all my friends have moved on and I don't have anyone to spend time with.
Yeah.
So for me this month, in deciding kind of not only for myself what I thought the Keystone Habit should be, but also for the people who are taking the course that goes alongside this, I sort of chose what I thought was a challenging but acceptable goal of trying to spend at least one day per week doing some activity where you either get to meet new people or you're maintaining a friendship with someone that you don't see very often, which is a little bit vague, but my idea here is that I think of outreach as encompassing also that periphery of your network, the people that, if you didn't put in an effort, you wouldn't see them, as opposed to, you or the people that I work with or these that you're just going to automatically interact with because your lives are so intertwined. So that was the Keystone Habit. And yeah, it was an interesting month.
How so?
Yeah, I mean, this month was interesting because we record these things a little bit delayed. But when this actual month was happening, when I was actually working through it, it was December, which is probably the worst month in terms. Like, I wasn't really thinking when I was planning for myself. December's kind of a bad month because not only is it's cold, it's dark, you don't have the same kind of activities you could do, especially in an outdoorsy place like Vancouver, that you would have in the summertime or in the springtime. But also it's it's a time for family. It's like a little bit less focused on outreach, it's more focused on this. So this was not maybe the most successful in terms of, like, there was maybe, I think definitely the Christmas week I didn't do anything because it was harder to get stuff.
Our family over.
We had family over, and that was how it started. But I think it was good for me because just going through the process of, like, reconnecting with old friends, figuring out, like, making a list of people that I wanted to keep in touch with, and sort of, okay, I'm going to make sure that I follow up with them on some sort of regular basis to, like, keep up our friendship. And then also having things like going back to my meetup.com profile and like finding events here in Vancouver that, I don't always have time to go to one every single week, but having them on the schedule means that, okay, yeah, maybe this time slot would work. I can make it work. So I was going to some meetups and for both language learning and some other things. I was doing some of those as well. And so keeping those opportunities open was helpful. Yeah.
Right. I found this this month very interesting, and reading what you were writing about it and your research behind outreach, because that's being a mom of like 2 young children. This is something that's just kind of totally in the background for me right now. And I feel like, even though I'm not extremely extroverted, I feel like I never really had any problems reaching out to people and connecting with other people pretty much throughout my whole life. I really liked being involved, like even in high school, I liked signing up for different things where I could meet different people, like musicals and things like that, and doing sports. There was always something, and with that came other social activities that were related, right? And then in university, I was always volunteering, always meeting new people. And when you're in university, you're also in different classes.
Yeah.
So every hour of the day you get to see new faces and introduce yourself to other people and meet professors and go to different, I don't know, wine and cheese events and different banquets and things like that, where you're connecting and networking. That's pretty much the whole university life. And then, you graduate, you start working, you have your own business, you're meeting people through that, right? And then the kids come, right? And there's this, and the focus is on them, which is really good. And I really do realize that although it comes with its own challenges, this is a very short amount of time that we get to do this, because eventually they'll become like their own independent people and do their own things, and our sort of day-to-day normal life will come back to normal. But I think this is a very interesting one, because especially during this time, having these types of networks and keeping up with these people is so important, because then once you kind of your time frees up and you have more time to hang out and do different things, if you forget about it or if you ignore it, it's much harder to get back into the things that interest you, meeting the type of people that you want to meet. So what is the best way of maintaining this, of sort of making sure that you are taking care of yourself and being social and meeting people and having your own life beside the family life? Like, what do you think is the best way of doing that?
Well, I think some of it is that what you do socializing changes a lot, I think, when you have kids. And I don't think it makes it less or more valuable, but I think, when you're younger, at least for me, maybe I shouldn't generalize to everyone, but when I was younger, to me, socializing was like, going to people's house parties, or you go to a restaurant and you have drinks with people, you do these kinds of like sort of young childless people sort of activities. That's what you associate with socializing. And so that becomes kind of harder to do maybe when you have kids. It's something that, you can get a babysitter sometimes, you can bring the kids sometimes, but it's more challenging. And so there can be this feeling of like, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. But there's also lots of opportunities for doing things that are different, so we have a lot of friends that also have kids now. And so, we even have this little group of people that we met that just sort of lived in our neighborhood kind of around the time the pandemic started. We were, new parents, and there's a bunch of other people that are new parents. They're all cut off from all their social services. We kind of made this group, and, we still go to everyone's kids' birthday parties, and they come to our parties, and we socialize in that way. Now you're socializing in like often, this kind of pandemonium where you're like having these like interrupted conversations because your kids are running around and doing various things, but it's different, but I think it's important. And so I think
it still counts.
It's not even just that it still counts. I just think it's like worthwhile to step back for a second and like realize how this obsession with a kind of youth culture, this idea that like what socializing is doing what like young single people do in their 20s or maybe 30s, is peculiar. It's culturally peculiar. Like most of human history, you were always embedded in community structures which were not just young 20-somethings. It was like people of all different ages, of different family sizes. When you had kids in previous sort of eras and previous cultures, you were, interconnected with other people that have it. So this idea that like, oh, well, you have to silo yourself off in your house or apartment and raise your kids, and then like once they become fully independent, then you can emerge from that.
Your life back.
I think that's I think that's sort of a weird way of looking at it, and I think it also sometimes puts a pressure on you, because I think when you're a parent, the more you sort of have any kind of like, well, I'm not able to live the kind of life I want because of my kids, it creates a negative feeling in what you're doing. So I always feel like, it's not always easy to do, but the way to cultivate a healthy attitude in your own family is always to see like, well, what opportunities are enabled by this? What is the kind of thing that I can do because I have kids? And so I think the shift toward the shift towards like, you're making friends with other people who have kids, you're doing activities that are like that, more family-centric sort of stuff is very beneficial. And I think that we've done that to a certain extent. And so that's also been a shift for me in thinking about like pre-having kids versus now. It's not so much that this foundation isn't important, but like how it manifests in my life has changed quite a bit.
Right.
And I think for you as well.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes. And I didn't mean it in like in any kind of like negative way at all. We were just kind of talking about like how your life shifts from being single to married and then now having kids. And I feel very lucky that we have a lot of really good friends. But even the friends that we have that don't have any kids now, we're just kind of like, okay, well, we can't go out late and party with you guys, but you're always welcome to come over dinner
at 4:00 or something.
But even like a later dinner, we just put the kids to bed and then we all hang out in our living room and eat good food and hang out with each other and socialize that way. We just we've just kind of shifted the way we do things.
But I think what like the sort of idea though that just we have, I think this is something can be hard. I think if you become a new parent, is just like there's a certain I don't know, maybe a certain cultural bias that like there's this like real kind of prizing of like what it's like to be sort of, a single person, just meaning this kind of like the sorts of things that person does is sort of like what you should try to do or like aspire to. And I just feel like if you look at anything in like history or read things from like other cultures, it's just like it's not like that most of the time. Right. And I think it's a more of a cultural preoccupation. I mean, you even think about like watching sitcoms or something like that. And then the in the sitcom, which maybe the sitcom, the characters start out as single people who have interesting lives, and then one of them has kids, and it's like the kid is always like barely in the background of that person's life. Like they always have a babysitter or someone while they're still doing the kind of like sitcom single person adventures. And to me, it's just sort of that expresses a certain kind of value system of our society that like, well, what the characters on Friends or, whatever are doing is what's like really like interesting and important. And that, that other stuff is like, not, that's kind of, that's sort of like a nuisance in the background. And I think that that's something that, if you have kids and you're doing this kind of thing, this foundation is still important. It's still important to be making friends and doing this kind of thing. But yeah, maybe it's not like, you're not going to as many late night outings or this kind of thing, right?
Right. So how did you evaluate yourself in terms of outreach when you started it in the beginning of the month? How were you like, okay, this is what my life is like right now, and this is what I want to change, or maybe not even change, just kind of keep up with. And so I've set these goals for myself. How did you do that?
I mean, I definitely feel like, on the one hand, if I sort of evaluate myself globally, like I do have good friends, we do have a network, like all these things that we were talking about. So if we're even looking at just sort of, a concept I brought up a couple times in these conversations is this like idea of this sort of diminishing returns curve for various aspects of life. So there's areas where you can see kind of like the association between like exercise and health, for instance, and it has this sort of declining returns curve where if you don't do any exercise and you do a little bit of exercise, you quickly move up this steep side of the curve and you get a lot of these benefits, but then it flattens out. And the person who's running ultra marathons is not like that much better health than the person who runs marathons. Like it just gets to this place of diminishing marginal returns. And I mean, it's hard to evaluate something like socializing and friends because the way it impacts our life is so multidimensional. But even for things like health, I know we'll talk about it a little bit, but the political theorist Robert Putnam, he has some like graphs on the association between club membership and health, which sounds like they're totally unrelated things, but we'll get to it. They actually have some more relation than you'd think. But that the curve is pretty steep. So it seems like there's a real negative penalty to being socially isolated, to being someone who doesn't have close friends, who's socially disconnected. There's a really strong negative health penalty. But I don't think it's the case from like being someone who has some friends to having like being the most gregarious person in the world, that there's an equal amount of benefit, at least in terms of health. Probably in terms of career, depends on what kind of line of work you're in. Maybe the curve is a little different. So I don't want to say it's true for all aspects of your life. But for me, when I step back and I think about our life, I feel like I'm over the hump of that curve in terms of, I have enough social contact. I never feel lonely. I don't feel like I'm isolated at all. But if I reflect on what I'm doing, I also see that, it's because I've built a lot of these relationships in less busy time periods. And so compared to those earlier time periods, it's one of those things that, I'm not renewing the resource as much as I should, and I think it's not just family life that makes it a little bit harder, but even just the way I've approached my work. I used to be, I have some colleagues that I used to joke around with that like when I was in my 20s and my work was like less busy, less intense, I had fewer deadlines and stuff. I used to just have Skype open and then I'd be like, oh, so-and-so is online. And I would just send them a message and then we'd end up talking for an hour. And it always felt sort of unproductive when I would do it back then. And it was sort of like, well, I'm too busy for that kind of thing right now. But it's this sort of casual, spontaneous, like, oh, hey, let's have a chat with so-and-so. Like that keeps your network open. Like it is important. It is productive. You can't just be dismissive about it. And so that's something that I'm recognizing I have to be more intentional and deliberate about because, at least in my professional life, networking with other people is important, but it's never something that is urgent. Usually it's sort of like, okay, I'll contact these people after I'm done this big project or I finish this big batch of work.
That's a really good point. And one thing I sometimes wonder about though is how do you keep up with all these relationships that are obviously important to you without being too, I don't know, robotic, or how do I say it, like almost in a fake way where you're like sending messages on a time schedule and having a list of people, because for some people it's totally fine. And one example for me is one of my really good friends, where like we're really close friends, and if we lived in the same city we would see each other regularly, but we don't. And we talked about it once, and I was like, it's really easy to not talk to each other for such a long amount of time, and I don't want that to happen. And I said to her, can I send you how do you say it, like an event reminder where we both, it's just in our calendars, and we both get it once a month. It just shows up, and we talk to each other, and it's like, call. It's a scheduled call for both of us, and it's in both of our calendars. And sometimes she's away or she's busy, so it's just a text. But even a text, we're happy because we both know that it's been done. Now, we are both totally fine with that. I'm an accountant, she's an actuary, and we have a very clear understanding that this is great for our relationship, and we like it this way. But for some people, that's not natural, and it's not like, how would you say it?
No, I understand.
It doesn't feel
organic.
Exactly, it doesn't feel organic. So how do you maintain these relationships in that way?
Yeah, I don't think that, like, my goal, at least in sort of, because I mentioned kind of collecting up some names of like people that I'm friends with that I want to kind of keep in touch with. My goal of that was never like, oh, well, I got to, like, this is the weekly text to so-and-so. It's not like that at all. It's more that if I have it as a recurring reminder in my to-do list system, and when I contact the person, I see that person, I check it off, then what that does is it gives you a sense of like, oh, this is how long it's been since you've talked to so-and-so when you do it a quick scan. So for me, it's not so much a to-do item like, oh, today I have to contact so-and-so. Like, it can still be based on my availability. Like, it could be organic, but it's just like, oh, here's a reminder that it's been, 2 years since you talked to so-and-so. And so I think that's more beneficial, because I've definitely done in the past where I've set it up where it was like, my attitude is like, oh, I should be contacting so-and-so every X months. And it feels weird for me to do it. And it feels like, very mechanical and this kind of thing. And I'm sure there's some people that manage to make it work and pull it off. But for me, I think that wasn't the issue. It was more the awareness that because life would get busy and there's a certain subset of people that I'm not going to just have organic interactions with them if I don't make an effort, that making that sort of, okay, let's, remind myself to, that it's been a while since I've spoken to someone. And then I think, so if I look at that person's name and I'm like, oh, I don't really feel like reaching out to them right now, and then I just ignore it. But it would be more kind of like, oh yeah, I should reach out to so-and-so. And then you send a message and it is genuine. It's not, it's not something that's just like, this is some autoresponder I sent up and just be like, it's like you when you get those reminders from your dentist where they're like, you're due for another appointment with Scott. Yeah, like, that's not what I want to do at all. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Time for your scheduled hangout with me, right?
That's funny. So let's go into the quick takeaways that you had. And the first one was about, good friends keep you from getting sick. You wrote that in your article. Yeah. And you said people with better social networks live longer, and the health impacts of loneliness and isolation are in the ballpark as well-known dangers such as smoking cigarettes. Yeah. The U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, he was saying, and I don't remember the exact number, maybe 13 or 14, but it was like, sort of loneliness or social isolation has the same kind of negative health outcomes as like smoking 13 or 14 cigarettes per day, which is kind of alarming because smoking is, if you look at things that impact your health that we have like a well-studied
relationship with. Smoking is sort of like the gold standard for it. It has such a large impact if you smoke a lot of cigarettes every day. Your overall mortality rate, like I think the hazard ratio is, I don't know, between like 50% higher. So like you're just basically your health outcomes are about 50% worse when you're a regular smoker. And so the idea that loneliness, something that just social relationships often feel so kind of ephemeral and distant from like hard things like biology, but the idea that it has that level of impact, I think it does mean that, you know, if you are someone who's a little bit more of an introvert, that you kind of chronically under prioritize your relationships, you're maybe someone who you have a busy job, or you've relocated, you know, maybe you're in a new country, or maybe you're in a new city, you have, you know, you're disconnected from some of those sort of like automatic friends you might have gotten through school or childhood. I think this is a message to take that seriously, and I think that it matters more as you get older. I think all health stuff matters more as you get older, but it seems to be the case that like if you are an older person who's particularly socially isolated, you know, just everything is amplified because there's more risk of, you know, you having some kind of troubling health decline, and then no one's keeping track of you, no one's taking care of you. You know, just the added toll of the additional stress on your body, it matters. And so, again, this is just sort of what I was referring to earlier, where I think it's very easy to view like, yeah, socializing and making friends and hanging out with people as being not a frivolous foundation, but a kind of something that's sort of orthogonal to the more productive foundations like fitness and, you know, keeping track of your to-do list and stuff. Like this one's just for fun, but it really isn't. I think if you don't maintain good relationships, of which outreach is a very important part, then yeah, you're going to be in that situation.
It's so important. I remember it being COVID. And us being in Vancouver, our whole family is in Winnipeg. And we just would go on these, and at least, I mean, we had each other at least, and this tiny baby. And we would just go on these long walks talking about how lonely we are every day. And then it was actually you, because we saw this group of moms that would meet once a week outside and sit in a big circle on the grass. Yeah. And I'm not as extroverted as you are, obviously. I'm a little bit more kind of to myself, but you're like, you went up to them and you started talking to them.
This is what happened. We would walk by them a few times. And so this is like pandemic era, like everyone's meeting outdoors kind of thing, right? And so there was just these blankets where each one is like appropriately the 2 meter distance away from each other with their like little same aged baby. And it was just sort of like, well, what are the chances that these women all had a baby? They were existing friends and they all had a baby at the exact same time. Like they must have met each other through something, right? Yeah. And I remember we walked by them once or twice because they were in the park near our house, and you were kind of like, oh, I wish I had a friend group like that. And so I was just like, all right, I just went up to them. I'm like, excuse me, is this like, how do you guys know each other? This kind of thing. And they were just sort of like, oh yeah. And then I was like, oh yeah, well, because like we have a baby. And then we're friends to them to this day. So
to this day, I'm friends with that mom group.
It's my comfort with my own existing social awkwardness that allows me to do these things, because I'm just sort of like, yeah, you know what? I'll just go up and say hi to these people. Yeah,
right? The story of how Scott was doing my own outreach.
Yeah.
And just found me all these friends.
Well, now you're really close with them. Like you're much closer friends with them. So I got to get tips from you on I'm good at make you the introduction, and then I move through the background.
That's not true at all. Well, we're the moms, so and we kind of meet with each other. And we go for lunches. I don't know, a couple of times a year, a few times
5 years
a year.
ago. So yeah, it's
we meet, but then we also we've maintained in touch throughout all the years since then, and I'm still friends with a lot of those women that we met that day.
But so you can see like how the outreach is one of these things that like you don't necessarily need to be like going out and socializing every single night of the week, but you know, you had recently relocated here. You know, obviously the pandemic was not a great time for socializing for almost everyone, but there was, you know, that little connection that was made there, that's led to
changed their life.
Yeah, it's
totally
made a huge difference. And so if you don't do those things, if you don't cultivate those habits and skills to replenish that, you could very easily get in this situation where it's like, I have like one or two friends and but they're busy and I don't spend time with them. And I don't know. The other thing too I felt about this foundation is that with fitness, we have sort of a more objective indicator of like, well, this is sort of how much you probably should be getting. I mean, the sort of standard recommendation is 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous cardiovascular exercise per week. So this is like this kind of objective, science has determined this is sort of what you need, or at least it's a recommended amount. You probably could use more than that too, but at least it's some kind of objective amount. Whereas I feel like loneliness, because the way it impacts your health, a big part of it is your stress response. Basically, when you're feeling stressed out because you're socially isolated, it raises your cortisol levels. Chronic cortisol raising levels lowers your immune system, which causes you to have not only like cortisol is bad for your heart, raises your blood pressure, these kind of things, but then it's also lowering your immune system. You're more likely to get sick. Even things like potentially some kinds of cancers too is related to the immune system. So there's a definite impact on health. But because it comes through the stress response, it is something that's very personal, There are some people who maybe they would be totally fine with a very small group of friends. And then there's other people that would be intolerable. They'd have to have a lot more. So I think for socializing, for outreach, it's also something that like you really have to reflect personally, just sort of like, do I feel like my cup runneth over with friends, or do I feel like it's half empty? And your cup might be really big or it might be really small, but what matters is whether you feel that way.
You have to, you have to really reflect on yourself and your own personal needs. Yeah, that's very interesting. And so this was your quick takeaway too, which I also thought I really was thinking about my past with this, but you said acquaintances matter too. You said, although the focus for most of us is on having deep friendships, there is a whole literature on the role of weak ties or people you rarely see in being more important for getting job opportunities or word of mouth opportunities.
Yeah, so there was this very famous sociological paper called The Strength of Weak Ties. And basically, it made the argument that the people you know less well may actually be better for your finding out new opportunities. So work is obviously a case where, like, if you need to get a job, part of it is like you need to hear about an opening somewhere, or you need to hear about some opportunity. And it's interesting because this kind of goes against our intuition. Our intuition is like, well, obviously the people who are closest to you would be most useful to you. But this sociologist, and it's Granovich or something, I forget I'm going to mess up his last name. I'm thinking of it offhand. But he made this argument from like topological ground. So basically, if you imagine, we all used to this now with like social networking, but if you imagine, this was in the 1970s, pre-social networking. There's
LinkedIn and there's all these different things
but if you imagine a visualization of your personal network of being like each person is a little circle and then there's a line connecting you to each person you know, his argument was that, well, you can imagine that someone who's a close friend or close friendships are people that are kind of tightly interconnected. So you can imagine your friends, your other friends' best friends, usually, like not 100% of the time, but you know these people, maybe not as well, but like you have strong kind of interlocking bonds. And his point was that just by kind of topological reasons, that can't be where you're getting new information from, because if there was new information in there, you'd already know about it. It has to come from the outside somewhere. And where does it come from? It comes from people that you're only more weakly associated with, because they have a totally different group of friends. So they hear about things that come through that network. And in this paper, where he makes this sort of mathematical argument for why this should be the case, he does some research and he looks at people who, where did you recently get, I think he was looking at professionals and managerial people where they recently got hired, and they got hired through word of mouth. How did they find out about it? And when they listed the person that they contacted, it was sort of, well, how often do they see this person? And it tended to be people that they saw more than more than once a year, but less than like every week or two. So it was in this sort of like people you kind of know that you see them every couple months. Those were the people who were the best contacts. Now, I mean, this theory has undergone like a lot of revision since the 1970s, but one of the papers, the follow-up papers I read that was talking about it in terms of academic citations, and like people who have a lot of weak ties have better academic careers because they're able to tap these sort of somewhat distant connections for opportunities. And so I think this is another like totally unrelated to the health and happiness angle, but just clearly we all understand networking is at least a component of professional success, that, if you know people and they know you and you have reputations and stuff like this, that kind of greases the wheel, so to speak, for getting job opportunities and this sort of thing, or new clients in business. But it's also very important to have that breadth, to have those sort of weaker ties of people that you're friendly with, but you don't know intimately, because that's where those opportunities are going to come from. So that's another reason to maintain this foundation independently of just like having good relationships with like your kids and your spouse and your best friend and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. No, I was reflecting back on that and even thinking about university. We were required to do so much networking in university.
Well, we were in business school too. I know you mentioned the wine and cheese, and I was like, I know that wasn't like an every single person. I don't think the math majors were necessarily doing a lot of those events, but in business school was a little like training ground.
There was a lot, and now I'm like 20 years old, and I'm thinking, why do I have to go and do all these things? And I have to be, I was asking every year for my birthday. I asked my mom to buy me a suit. That was because I'm like, you have
stereotypical,
to I need to wear a suit. Yeah. And so, but when I graduated, or it was maybe a couple of years after graduation, I was looking for a new job. I wanted to change jobs, and at one of the business banquets, I think it was, I was sitting next to an HR manager at one of these companies, and I had gotten her information, she had gotten mine, and I think I had reached out to her just saying, nice to meet you. It was years, I don't know, maybe at least 2 years that I hadn't even seen her. But at the time, I think she was pregnant, so I knew she was going on maternity leave. And I was kind of calculating things in my head, like, okay, when can I reach out where I know she's back? And I did. And then she replied back, and I ended up getting a position at that company. And that was so important. Knowing, like, meeting people like that and keeping in touch with them was so beneficial, especially in business school, right?
I mean, it's true in general. I mean, I don't know what the stats are. I know like LinkedIn publishes these like stats, like most people find their jobs through personal contacts, but of course it's LinkedIn publishing it, so it's a little bit take it with a grain of salt. But I mean, I think we've hired for people in our business, and so I've had a taste of this. And I mean, it's not even like, we're just a small, tiny little company, so it's not like we have so much competition. I'm sure if you were like Google or Meta and you're hiring, the competition is so much fiercer, and the amount of resumes you get for every sort of position opening. And it's not that you want to be cruel to people who are applying, but if you get 100 resumes, you really can't devote more than a few seconds looking at all of them. And you just gravitate toward big things like, okay, they went to this school, they got this degree, they've got this work experience. It boils you down to like the simplest data points about your life. And, especially as someone who has had a rather unconventional career, if I wrote down like, this is what my actual credential, or this is what I've actually got on my resume, it's either going to be not relevant to that job, or it's going to be not that impressive. And so like, if I had to go out, on the job market again, this whole thing collapses and I'm out with my resume somewhere, I would want it to be through personal contacts,
right?
Because, throwing your resume in a pile of 100 names is just going to be, you're just rolling the dice that they even look at you.
Yes.
And I think, especially if you're someone, I know we talked about going to business school, but I mean, I definitely have a lot, like, studying computer science. I have a lot of, in the STEM kind of fields. There's a lot of people who really focus on their technical competency. There's a lot of people who build, they're really quite impressive at doing the work, but maybe they're not so good at,
networking.
Yeah. They're not going to show up to the wine and cheese or whatever it is and say hi to people. And it's going to be hard for them because you know, they're the diamond in the rough, so to speak, but like most of the diamonds in the rough get looked over. So I think this cultivating at least some minimum amount of, you know, being friendly with other people, getting to know people,
Right.
Especially if you are trying to like get a new job, or you're trying to get more business, or you're trying to secure opportunities. I mean, even when I was getting started doing what I'm doing, I was so grateful for those early contacts I made in the kind of early blogosphere, because those were the people that steered my career. I mean, like, heck, I've done these courses with Cal Newport, and you know, we've collaborated a number of times, but like we just met when he was like still in grad school and I was like first year university, and we were like both writing articles about like studying tips online. I mean, that was a relationship that came out of that. And so I think, you know, it's important to have some of that base of outreach, even if it's, you know, you're not always in a situation where you're like flipping through the Rolodex, as it were, to try to contact people.
Yeah. Well, when I was moving here, so what happened was we both,
like, to Vancouver.
Yeah. So we met in Winnipeg, and we were doing long distance for a while, and eventually we decided we'll live in Vancouver, and I'm gonna move to Vancouver and live with you. Did I have a job in Vancouver? No. and so I remember moving here and also no network in Vancouver either. I didn't know anybody here. I didn't know anybody that was professional, or I had nothing.
Yeah.
And so I remember going on the CPA website and looking at events that they have, and they just, because that's really what I was thinking. That was my mindset. I have to go and I have to meet people before I start just applying, sending my resume to different, like 100 different companies. And exactly what you're saying. I knew that it was going to be completely looked over and it was going to be a waste of my time. I'm pretty sure we did it. Like, I think you were helping me with my resume, and I did send some application that didn't go anywhere. But what happened was I ended up going on this speed interview night. And I didn't think anything was going to turn out from it. But it was these speed interviews. You go and you meet with 20 different companies, and you just sit down and you talk to each one of the representatives for 10 minutes. 5-10 minutes. And a week later, I got a call back. And then I got a position just through that one night of networking. And the fact that it was in person, I got to meet them, and they obviously like had a good impression of me. That's how I got my job. And it wasn't applying or sending emails or anything like that. So, well,
there's this whole idea of like, why should networking be so important, especially when you're like hiring for jobs? Like, it seems like vaguely nepotistic, of like, oh, you know, you're going to help out your friend or this kind of thing. But I don't really think that's the reason. I mean, clearly nepotism is an issue in all professional walks of life, but I don't think it's just I'm going to help you, you help me kind of back scratching thing. I think what it is that trust and reputation are these kind of limited resources. They only transmit so far. So, you know, if I am applying somewhere and you tell me about some job opportunity, then maybe because we have that point in contact, we'll be able to get connected, and you know, he'll recommend me to his boss, and he'll recommend me, and because we both know this person in common, like that, there's a little bit of transitiveness that are like, okay, I know him, I can vouch for him, this kind of thing. But you get 2 people, it gets weaker. 3 people, now all of a sudden you're just basically strangers, right? And I don't consider this opportunity any differently from just giving you my resume, nor does the person who's asking for it that way. And so this kind of like limited halo of like, there are certain kinds of interactions that are just facilitated if you have only like 1 or maybe 2 degrees of separation. So if you have a larger network, you just have a much larger zone that you can influence these things. And I'm very aware, like when I'm saying this, like this is sort of the theory that I understand. It's something that I recognize in myself, that it's not like my innate tendency to be like a networker. Like there's a lot of people I know, especially in business, especially like colleagues of mine, that are, 10 times better networkers than
know.
me. And I'm just sort of like, like I should be more like that person. And so I think sometimes when you struggle with something or you don't feel like you're a natural at it, there can be a kind of a tendency to sort of dismiss it as being like, well, whatever, that doesn't matter because of such and such, or I don't care about that for this reason. But I think in some cases, the things that you're weaker at, you should be more curious about, because there is a tendency to be a bit flippant about them. And again, because of this curve, like it's easier to get the benefits sort of paradoxically when you're bad at something. That when if you are already in really good shape, then getting fitness advice is kind of useless to you. It's not going to make you that much more healthy. But if you are in really bad shape, doing a little bit, it's going to make a big difference. And so similarly, if you're an introvert, if you're shy, if you think the idea of networking is slimy and gross, like you're the ideal person to benefit from doing a bit more outreach, because just making your network a little bit bigger is going to have this disproportionate influence on your life outcomes. So I think it's a sort of an interesting paradox of things that, like, at least in this sort of domain that we're talking about, these foundations, it's often the weakest link that most deserves attention.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about Bowling Alone from Robert Putnam. You told me this was your favorite book. I asked him, like, if there's one book that I should read, which one would it be? And you said, well, definitely Bowling Alone, but don't read the book. Watch the documentary.
The Netflix documentary, Join or Die.
Join or Die.
Because it's so much easier to watch an hour and a half documentary than the book is. The book is great, but it's like very much this kind of scholarly sort of book where like he's trying to impress over critics who doubt his thesis, and so there's a lot of data. There's a lot, so you kind of if you were sort of like, I basically agree with that. Maybe you only need to have like the summarized Coles Note version of all the data he assembles. But
I did watch it, and it was great. I really enjoyed
there you
it.
Go. Plug for Netflix.
This was your quick takeaway from it. You said, democracy itself may be at stake since the 1960s. Community and civic life have withered from its post-World War II peak. This decay of social infrastructure may be a major reason for our collective distrust and polarization.
So Robert Putnam wrote this paper in the 1990s that was also titled Bowling Alone. And the title comes from this observation. I think he went to a bowling alley. This is in the 90s, keep in mind, too. He goes to the bowling alley, and he finds out that the amount of people who are bowling has gone up, which kind of in keeping with population growth and this kind of stuff. But the amount of bowling leagues has declined a lot. So it doesn't mean technically that there's a lot of people who are just literally bowling by themselves. But what he's noticing is that, I'm just going to go with a friend and, bowl a little bit is a qualitatively different kind of social experience than a league where you form a team and you're forced to interact with other people in society, and it's structured and organized, and basically you're bringing together people from different segments of society so that you can regularly interact with them. And he made this observation that, it seemed like to him in this paper that all sorts of organizations from, like Rotary and Lions Club and, people who work for political organizations and this kind of stuff, that essentially this enrollment in civic life and community life has declined in America. And then the book, which followed up and which published, I think it was published in 2000, underscored this point, that this was a trend that was sort of wide-ranging, especially on formal metrics of organizations, so things like club membership, political activism, all sorts of things like this. The kind of formal organizations were declining, but even informal stuff seemed to be declining too. Like he finds some sort of data from advertisers who are keeping track of like how many picnics people went on each year, or like dinner parties they threw, and those were also declining. And so he makes this case that this has been just this general decline in America of this kind of civic participation. And so a couple things to note about that. First, the peak seemed to be around like 1950, sort of like after World War II. So it wasn't the case that, the United States always had high levels, so we're sort of like always a golden era in the past is declining. It turned out that actually the beginning of the 20th century was also a sort of a lower period, and it ramped up. So it was going in the opposite direction. And the thing he also found is based on not only studies in data on North America, but some of his interesting work on studying the political process in Italy. So he was involved in some work when there were all these regional governments set up, and because they were brand new governments, they all had like kind of cookie cutter identical forms, but they're taking growth in like very different political soils. So, and he found that basically the correlation between civic participation and how like well functioning these governments were, like how democratic they were, how corrupt they were perceived to be, whether there was people were happy with it, like they were getting what they were paying for these services, was really strongly correlated. It was correlated a little bit with income, it was correlated a little bit with education, but it was really correlated with this kind of civic participation. And so this forms his theory that we have this thing called social capital. So social capital is this sort of embedded relationships and interactions with people that that forms the kind of glue of society. And that this is a sort of necessary ingredient for democracy and civic life to prosper. That if we don't have this, it's not enough to just sort of go through the motions of voting and having political candidates and stuff. They're going to not seem representative. They're going to seem corrupt. And it's not just a perceptions thing, it's probably a reality.
Yeah, it builds trust between the people, right?
He makes this case that there's this thing called generalized trust. So when we have specific trust, it means that like I have trust in you because we have a relationship. Whereas if I meet someone on the street, I am basing my picture on whether to trust them with like, hey, could you watch my laptop when I'm at the coffee shop? I'm going to go use the bathroom. That interaction with a total stranger is based on what do I think about strangers? If I ask them to do this and they agree, can I trust them with that? Is this something that I can believe that they can do? And this is a sort of a general belief I have about society that presumably comes from interacting with people regularly, right? Like are people in general trustworthy or not? And that seems to be an incredibly important thing, not only for political success, but economic success. Like countries that score really high in this kind of generalized trust tend to be much better functioning countries, because if you think about it, every time you don't trust random people, you're putting this transaction cost on everything you do with them. So if you believe that most business owners in retail locations are unscrupulous, then there's this additional tax you pay every single time you go to this place. You're going to be very, I can't trust this person. I'm not going to buy this. Whereas if I believe, if I buy this product and it doesn't work, I'll bring it back and they'll give me my money back, no questions asked, then I feel more willing to buy things. It's this grease for society to function. And so it's interesting that like all these wide-ranging consequences kind of come down to not just outreach in general, but this sort of specific community-focused outreach, this idea of not just having your own clique of friends, but being embedded in a real place where you're forced to interact with people who maybe come from different walks of life, who maybe are, from a different neighborhood, they have different jobs, maybe they have different ages, different demographics, that this is a very important thing for society. And so I don't know, it's a weird book to read because on the one hand, it's very pessimistic. Like he's clearly documenting a downward trend that has, presumably in most cases only gotten worse since it was published in 2000. And you can just see the consequences mirrored in our environment. I mean, I don't have to wink, wink too much to be talking about what's been happening in the world, politically, to be like, is this not an obvious consequence of the fact that we don't trust each other, that we don't trust our institutions, that we believe that, people are corrupt and scheming and conspiratorial? Like this is directly downstream of the fact that we're isolated from each other, that we live in these kind of, little self-segregated little pockets of society. And so it's a disappointing book, but I think it does have this idea embedded in it, which is that, if you go out and you join a club, you join an organization, not just someone who starts something, but who joins something, who participates, who, gets to know your neighbors, who does this kind of thing, that you are not just benefiting your own life by making friends and having people like this, but you are adding to the stockpile of social capital in the place that you live. And those little additions, that little glue, that's the thing that holds our society together. So it's tremendously important. And, it's something that to be honest, before I read Bowling Alone, it was not even an argument I'd ever considered before, that, we live this like very atomic kind of independent life.
That's
it's
incredible.
all self-improvement, but really it's about, also how these socializing kind of choices, how these communities we form impacts everyone else.
Yeah. And I think he mentioned in one of his interviews that I was watching that apparently even for schools, like how involved the parent is in their children's school has a lot more to do with the education than the amount of money they're putting towards it. And like even I was reflecting on myself, because this year I've been really trying to volunteer more and be more involved with our son's school, and I think it's really, I'm not really sure if I can evaluate if that has made a difference or not yet, but I think there is a value in it there, and I feel really good about it. I think he likes that I'm like around more and I'm doing things, and I can kind of see what his school is like from the inside when I'm there and volunteering, getting to know the people that are educating him, than if I'm like completely distant and just, drop off and pick up and just doing that.
Yeah.
So,
but it's interesting, it, like, as I said, it's a kind of a pessimistic book because he's talking about this, it's always very easy to be like, oh, well, things were better in the past. And clearly, if you look at the history, especially in North America, in the United States, there were a lot of things that weren't better in the 1950s. So he's certainly not denying that. But on this particular dimension of kind of community involvement, civic engagement, it was a sort of a high watermark for American society. And I think to a certain degree, some of the forces that have caused the United States for that social capital to wither are also true here in Canada, and they're also true in Europe and in other places. Like one of the major culprits is, and I mean, keep in mind, this is 2000, so this is before we have like social media and stuff, but he's blaming television. He's saying, television is a major reason why this has declined, because if you think about it, all this community civic involvement stuff, I mean, people are doing it, to make friends, but they're doing it also just past time, to be entertained, right?
Said we're all watching Friends
and not having friends.
Not having friends.
Yeah, you watch Cheers. You don't go down to the bar where all the, everyone knows your name, right? You just watch it on television.
Yeah.
But I think, there was another little thing that came up in my research, which was this idea of parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships is basically when you have a seeming feeling of relationship with someone, but it's totally one-sided, like a celebrity, for instance, right?
Oh, yes.
And it's interesting because if you think about like our evolutionary past, we were in a situation where every single person's face that you saw was someone you personally knew, right? You're never in a situation where, oh, well, I know all these details about this person, but they don't also know you, right? Like it was always in that kind of context. And so, if you know lots of details about someone's life, it's kind of like your brain saying, oh, I'm making an important investment in my like social network, and so I'm going to feel good about that. But instead, we sort of project this into this kind of celebrity space or this influencer space, or, even now you're listening to this right now. Presumably you're hearing me, you maybe don't know me. It's the same kind of thing. Now, I'm not saying that this is, necessarily bad. It can be a source of information. I follow lots of people that I don't know personally, but I worry that there can be sometimes this substitution effect that, like, instead of having actual conversation with people, I'm going to listen to a podcast, or instead of making real friends, I'm going to like follow this celebrity or get really involved in this fandom of whatever, or instead of, building a community with actual people who, might disagree with me and might be unpleasant and there might be friction, I'm going to watch some sanitized version of that on some sitcom and be like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, the six of us all sit down in this coffee shop with 3 cameras on us and like, laugh every 5 minutes. I think it's, television is good. Social media, well, it's maybe not good, but it's at least something that you can use. But I think it's something to be aware of, that, it's probably some of your desire to be involved in these things is a kind of misfire. It's like your brain saying, this juicy gossip about this celebrity is like relevant to me because in my, environment, my brain was designed, if I heard about some salacious story, it would be someone I knew. And so I should know about that gossip as opposed to, being just irrelevant for my life. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. It's
right,
something
rant
to
off.
no, I know. It's definitely something to think about. Get out there, people. Meet new friends.
And
reach
immediately
out.
all the listens drop right at this moment where it's just like, wait a minute, why am I listening to Scott? I gotta go outside.
Go call your friend.
I'll know I did well if the like viewing history on YouTube just has this sharp drop right now. All right.
Call your friend,
Click
go
off.
for a walk,
Right.
meet a friend for coffee.
Yeah.
So as our conclusion, now that everyone has left, do you want to give me an update of how you're doing with
right now that no one's here, it's time to do the monthly update. So again, this is month 6 of the project. So there were 5 months before. Basically, all the foundations have been continuing to go well. The fitness has been continuing to go well. I've been keeping up the daily habits. I've been a little bit, I was saying last month that I've had to make some adjustments, both because of the weather and because of some family things. I've been kind of on a less consistent schedule, but I've been still doing it. I've been still less consistent in that I'm not doing it the same time every day, but I've still been pretty good about keeping up the daily exercise. Same thing with productivity I feel like the productivity and personal finance stuff is very much in the background now. Eating well, I mean, it's good. This was a Christmas holiday, so it was definitely not like the perfect month for this one, but I think we did pretty good overall. And then the reading, of course, is something that I feel like I've been doing pretty consistently throughout. So yeah, now as I'm getting further and further into this project, I'm going to have like a grid of all the things that I'm doing for the month to review in these little discussions. But if anyone's interested in the project and some of the things I've already done, as well as some of the months that we're working on, they can check out some of the other essays I've written on there, including all of the books I've read. So for this month, I read a bunch of books. You can read them on my blog. There's little reviews I have of these individual books, including Robert Putnam's excellent Bowling Alone.
And we have how many more? Six more months. So if you want to keep following, subscribe. And we'll be back next month with...
next month is going to be sleep. So so if you see us in our pajamas,
I think we should do it in our pajamas.
Yeah, maybe.
Just show up here in pajamas. We'll just be in cozy blankets.
Yeah, we'll just go be in our bed and we'll just review from there. And we'll fall asleep halfway through. No, that's too much. Okay. All right. So well, we will see you next month. Take care.
Bye.